Almost all experts consider it the best stage in cycling history, a tappone dolomitico, where the protagonists were a Miguel Induráin at his best, and the two young cyclists who started cycling in a spectacular way, Eugeni Berzin and Marco Pantani. Attacks, feinting, strategy, mountains like Stelvio and the mythical Mortirolo, an epic battle that went down in history. Do you want to know what happened on the way to Aprica during the 1994 Giro d'Italia? Then follow my wheel and I'll tell you. The 94 Giro d'Italia reached its stage number 15 with the surprise of a young and unknown Russian of the Yewis team, wearing a pink jersey, surpassing Miguel Induráin himself in the time trial stages and climbing as the best climber in the high mountains. Another great surprise was the discovery of a young Italian climber named Marco Pantani, winner of the previous stage in Merano, who was demonstrating innate conditions for climbing and was approaching in the general less than 6 minutes of the Russian. Both riders had to endure conditions in a stage that would test their maturity and talent. Induráin was fourth in the general classification with 3 minutes lost, but he was going for more. For the first time, someone was able to surpass him in his field, the time trial. However, everyone's opinion was that Induráin would win his third consecutive Giro d'Italia. The tireless Bugno and Ciappucci were the great Italian hopes, especially the two-time world champion, who was third. The other position on the podium was occupied by the Frenchman Armand de las Cuevas. The great peloton had to face 196 kilometers through the Italian Dolomites, overcoming peaks such as Stelvio, La Cima Coppi, and the mythical Mortirolo, to finish with the Válico de Santa Cristina ascent, a second category mountain that would be the judge of the race. The stage started very calmly. The first part of the race was run at an amateur cycling pace. The first half of the Stelvio was climbed very slowly. Team Yewis set too slow a pace, where no other team wanted to take responsibility. The Stelvio had a very hard ascent of more than 20 kilometers with permanent snow, where cyclists have to climb to more than 2,750 meters of altitude, with an average slope of 7.4%, a real madness. In the last kilometer of ascent was the Italian Franco Vonna, a willful rider of the Italian MG team who lit the fuse. He was followed by some riders, including José Ramón Uriarte, which seemed to indicate that Induráin was well and wanted teammates ahead. A good sign for Spanish fans. Another rider who tried his luck was the Colombian Nelson Rodriguez, Cacaito, who would stand out as a second protagonist in the rest of the stage. Meanwhile, the peloton was still led by the Yewis team, which was gradually increasing the pace so that the race didn't get out of control. Vonna crowned the Stelvio alone with 4 minutes of advantage over the peloton, where all the tranquility he showed climbing became madness and lack of control in the descent. A long descent, almost 50 kilometers, where important men such as the Italian Ciappucci, Lelli, and Conti left the company of the peloton in search of a Dolomitic adventure in way to Aprica. A group of 6 cyclists was formed in pursuit of Franco Vonna, crossing Mazzo di Valtellina, where the ramps of the Colossus, that is already part of the history of the Giro and world cycling, began. It was the second time that the Giro ascended this face. The first was in 1991, with a recital by Chiotoli, and the expectations of the Italian fans were enormous. That day, the whole of Italy came to a standstill. The terrible Mortirolo consists of 12 kilometers with a 10.7% slope. There are no breaks and the ramps are constant. A continuous agony for cyclists where no help or tactics are worthwhile. Where each one fights against the road and against himself, and in which the strongest impose their law by entrusting themselves to the gods of cycling. The race arrived at the Colossus Mortirolo, with Vonna 6 minutes ahead of the peloton, and a group of 6 riders, among which was El Diablo Ciappucci, 4 minutes from Vonna. The Yewis team started the ascent in the lead of the peloton. The race was getting too out of control. Ciappucci was a very tough enemy. The battle was about to begin. On one of the first ramps, even before the second kilometer of climbing, the young Pantani breaks the peloton with a huge attack. One of the attacks, possibly the strongest of his career. The Spanish expert doesn't follow the wheel of the Italian, weighs 20 kilos more and tries, with great serenity, to follow his own pace. However, the Russian Berzin and De las Cuevas respond to the pirates' attack, something they will pay dearly for later. The race is completely broken, and the next 9 kilometers become individual fights, where everyone has to fight their own agony. Riders like Buño and Ugrumov are completely ruled out for the race, while Pantani and Berzin try to overtake an INDURAIN that, little by little, is acquiring its best pace and advancing steadily forward. A few meters later, the Russian explodes. Pantani is unreachable uphill, and it seems that the Russian is paying for his inexperience. Now, he is alone, without teammates, and with more than 80 kilometers to go. The Giro was becoming difficult for the Russian. Pantani seeks glory. In one of his most iconic ascents, with his characteristic style on the bike, the young Italian presents himself not only as a great climber, but as possibly a legendary cyclist. Behind, Induráin reaches Berzin, who manages to hold the wheel of the Spaniard, who goes from less to more, unlike the Russian, who 2 kilometers later collapses. At this moment, it seemed that the race was returning to normal, and that the Spaniard was going to win his 3rd Giro d'Italia. Twists of fate. At the head of the race, Pantani overtakes Vonna, who had started the ascent 6 minutes before, and before some crazed tifosi, the Italian crossed the top and throws himself towards the first step through Aprica in search of entering history. Induráin passes 51 seconds later, while the Russian loses 1 minute and 38 seconds with respect to the Italian. The Mortirolo has destroyed the race, and now everyone has to fight with their own strength. More emotion is impossible. Before you know the outcome, don't forget to subscribe to help us bring you more stories like this. Once the descent is over, the Pantani team makes the decision to wait for Induráin to join forces and try to get more time for the leader. A leader who comes behind alone in a group with Capucci, Lelli, and Conti, and where nobody seems to help him. A tough test for this young cyclist, probably the biggest of his career. Ahead, Induráin, Pantani, and the Colombian Nelson Rodriguez, survivor of the breakaway, arrive at the first pass through Aprica with an advantage of 2 minutes. The Russian seemed defeated, and everything suggested that Induráin would wear pink. But this is the beauty of cycling, that it's unpredictable. Little by little, the difference was growing when the race reached the Válico de Santa Cristina, the last mountainous difficulty. A second category pass with 6 kilometers of ascent at more than 7%. A real torture after a very hard stage. At this point in the stage, the general and maybe even the final victory were going to be decided. After the help of Induráin on the plain, Pantani starts again in search of the epic. We all believed that Induráin was going to act like in Mortirolo, picking up his rhythm and yielding as little as possible. However, what no one expected is that it was going to be one of his worst days as a cyclist, suffering one of the biggest fates of his career. It was an agonizing 6 kilometers. The Colombian didn't give him any relay throughout the ascent, something for which he went down in the history of Spanish cycling, the mythical cacaíto. The Spaniard had to face 6 kilometers of continuous agony as few times in his career. Behind, the Russian cyclist was not much better. Even his new adventurous companions left him behind. Ahead, Pantani was playing in another league. With an incredible pace, he continued to climb like an angel and put land in between him and his rivals in what was becoming an anthological exhibition. Already with the mountain ascended, he only had a small descent left in search of the finish line in Aprica. While Induráin, who was caught by Capucci, crossed the top of Santa Cristina 3 minutes later, he's lost half a minute per kilometer to the Italian, which is incredible. The Russian would cross a minute later, thus retaining the maglia rosa after defending himself tooth and nail, showing his quality as a cyclist. The pirate Marco Pantani reached the finish line in Aprica to get his 2nd consecutive stage in that Giro, placed 2nd in the general classification, consolidate himself as a future winner, and showed himself to the world of cycling as the best climber of that time. Behind, an exhausted Induráin reached the finish line with a difference of 3.5 minutes. while the Russian, who kept the pink jersey and his options of victory in Milan, lost half a minute more after defending like a true champion. If you've enjoyed this episode, subscribe or leave me in the comments which is for you the best stage in the history of cycling. And if you want to continue enjoying our stories, don't miss this.